Hello YouTube. I'm gonna tell you about a very interesting case because it involved a military aircraft armed with a nuclear warhead and what you could call an attack of a UFO or maybe an interaction with a UFO. Of course, this case is virtually unknown in the West except by those who really have to know it. But nobody like civilian researchers ever heard about it. And I do want to thank a Ukrainian researcher, Igor Koletyuk, who is the founder of the International Center EIBC. And also I want to thank Russian author and UFO researcher Mikhail Gerstein. He's written many books and he's one of the best experts in Russia on ufology. The initial report about this 1970 case I found on their website, Novosti Ufologii. So here's what happened. It was on May 16, 1970, that the crew of the Soviet long-range nuclear bomber Tu-16, under the command of Guard Captain Fyodor Ilyushenko, conducted a training combat flight. The task was to destroy the target, which was in the Pacific Ocean. Pay attention, please. And the crew successfully completed the task, gaining the height of 10,000 meters. And they took the course to the airfield Harol. Tu-16, it has a NATO designation Badger. And the captain of the Tu-16, Fyodor Ilyushenko, he recalled the following information. Please remember that he spoke Soviet military slang, and it was a colorful mixture of Russian and Ukrainian words. So I have to adjust some of them, but I do want you to have the essence of what had happened. And so this is from Fyodor Ilyushenko's report. And suddenly I noticed in front of me some bright star that moved left to the right. This bright star quickly approached me. From afar it resembled a ball lightning, and upon approach it increased to 10 meters at the diameter. When the fireball set on the fairing, the plane began to shake, and then, as if on command, all electrical appliances were switched off. It seemed like someone had decided to experiment with the bomber. And from it went such blue flames, they went onto my exterior of the cockpit glass. On the cockpit, there's a great noise in the cockpit. Such real unpleasant feeling, and that cringes all of me. And I was holding the wheel in my hands, fighting, and thought, what the? And then, well, I noticed that on the edges, some kind of prominescence like the sun, some radiation, but they were red from some bluishness, and you know, everything is burning. Do you understand? And when it closed the whole front hemisphere from me, it stood still a little, and then with such a noise like, and looks like I pierced it, and it went back off. Everything quieted down. Everything calmed down. The silence of stars. No questions. Nothing is wrong. Everything works. And Kiselyov, the radio operator, says to me, Commander, something tore itself off from us. Some fiery sphere. Ilyushenko continued. But very soon the star again appeared on the fairing of the airplane. I felt overload. I hung on belts and couldn't raise hands. So I looked and devices worked for me, but the gyro horizon did not work. It turned over, and I tried to put it in place, and not one single electrical wiring worked. The only things that worked was velocity meter and altimeter, and the cursor of the descent-ascent indicator. But I was shouting, and Volodya heard that I shouted, leave the airplane. But he said, how would I leave if you are here? At the altitude of about 500 kilometers per year, the altimeter showed something incredible. 10,000 meters above the ground, and suddenly a sharp fall. Strong, very big popping sound. There is condensation in the cockpit. Steam is formed. Something banged there, and there is this scary rumble in the cockpit. Such roar, and the altimeter shows 4,300 meters. It means I was falling 6,000 meters. The engine buzz in the navigator's battery discharge, but he didn't hear it. It turns that the blister above him was torn off. When we were thrown out, there was pressure, and the fourth did not have time to work to change the pressure. That pressure, which was at the altitude of 10,300 and 4,300 meters, it tore off navigator's blister, and Volodya Bodanovich was almost dragged up. If he was not wearing belt, he would have been dragged out. Up until now, I am not clear to us who did it to us. We came to our senses and again launched devices. After the landing, military experts studied records of the black box. What's amazing, practically everything was erased. Only the parameters of altitude and time were preserved. So in 6 minutes, the airplane lost more than 4,000 meters of altitude, and by all laws of physics, had to crash. Strange, what did happen? Later I started analyzing that something took possession of me. Well, that's one side, but who landed me? Who worked with my hands? I don't believe I could do this. I was beyond my abilities. It was beyond my abilities, my skills, and I believe that this is what it was really. I cannot call it a UFO. I cannot name it aliens or something like that, but who could have done it? By the way, there was a nuclear warhead on board the airplane. Perhaps the warhead that played the decisive role that the experiment over the pilots was stopped. That's what he said, Ilyushenko, the pilot. Now, let's look at that year, 1970. The incident described by Fyodor Ilyushenko took place on May 16. But I've done my research, and I want to let you know that something else of great significance took place in the month of May of that year and in the same area. In May of 1970, from April 14 to May 5, the Soviet Navy had begun exercise called Okean, Ocean, the largest peacetime naval exercise in history, with 200 surface combatants, submarines, auxiliary ships, and intelligence collection ships taking place, as well as hundreds of aircraft. Phases of the exercise were being conducted in the Baltic, Norwegian Sea, North Atlantic, Mediterranean, Indian Ocean, and Western Pacific. According to the Americans, the central focus of the maneuvers was an attack by a mixed task force on a simulated NATO strike force deploying into the Norwegian Sea. The pretext was celebration of the 100th birthday anniversary of Soviet leader Vladimir Lenin and demonstration of the might of the Soviet Navy. But I do not agree with the US observers and pundits. No, the focus of the demonstration of Soviet power was also to another adversary. And again, the war games took place over the two oceans, Atlantic and Pacific, and the seas that are adjacent, the Barents Sea, Norwegian, North Sea, Okhotsk, Sea of Okhotsk, the Sea of Japan, the Mediterranean, the Philippines, the Black Sea and the Baltic Sea. This is where the Soviet Navy ships and submarines encountered very unusual entities. I ask you to view my video Ghosts of the Oceans. You can also read my book that Philip Mantle and I co-authored. It's called Russia's USO Secrets, and it was published not that long ago. It is being translated now into 2 or 3 languages and should be available in your libraries. And here is in brief why the Soviets were concerned and why the Americans, the Russians, and the Chinese are aware of the issues today. And you need to pay attention to the world news and global news and understand that behind let's say today's concerns and news and emergencies, there lies a bigger picture. There is another adversary that all of the powers face, and they know it, and that's why sometimes you can see the war games being conducted together. The Chinese and the Russians and the Americans and the Chinese. Please pay attention to the news and understand the underlying reasons for what's being done, and also understand that this, like the space exploration, it's not going to be every nation for itself. It's not even today like that. They will work together. They are. But let's get back to 1970 and to the reason the Soviet Navy was concerned. It was actually the Soviet Minister of Defense, Marshal Andrei Antonovich Grechko, who had ordered the creation of a special research team by the Intelligence Directorate of the Soviet Navy to study various paranormal phenomena, such as quackery. Sergei Georgievich Gorshkov, a Soviet naval commander during the Cold War, who oversaw the expansion of the Soviet Navy into a global force, he was at the time the commander-in-chief of the Soviet Navy, admiral of the fleet of the Soviet Union, and he spared no effort for the research of the paranormal phenomenon that had obstructed his Navy's operations. Consequently, there existed a top-secret research program, for example, for the quackery phenomenon in the USSR from the 1960s to the early 1980s. But it was not the only unusual underwater phenomena of interest to the Soviet Navy. And again, you will find description, as I told you, where to look for them. But let's continue with this very strange story of the Soviet airplane armed with nuclear warhead and the UFO that interacted with it. Let's look at the missing documents. All available documents about this case, they were kept for many years secretly in the archives of the Kharkov section for the study of anomalous phenomena of the Soviet A.S. Popov Technical Society of Radio Engineering. See, I imagine it was not too safe to keep information on a military UFO interaction in the USSR, especially with an airplane armed with a nuclear warhead. But then changes came to the Soviet Union, it collapsed, and Ukraine, now an independent state, well, it experienced difficult economic times. Where to keep the UFO archives became a vital question to the researchers. So it was decided to transfer the archive to the Central Kiev section of the A.S. Popov Society. Now, the organization was later recreated as the Ukrainian Scientific Research Center for the Study of the Anomalies, ZOND. Український науково-дослідний центр вивчання аномалій ZOND in Ukrainian. I am from Ukraine. And as is often the case with genuine UFO researchers, they, Ukrainian researchers, experience a shortage of money and for the urgent transportation of the files from Kharkiv to Kiev. So they decided to get help from outsiders, and in order to generate their interest, Ukrainian UFO researchers had to provide commercial benefit for the trip. So the following happened according to the Zond researchers. I will omit personal details, but let me explain the most essential. A director from one well-known Ukrainian TV channel transported those UFO files from Kharkiv to Kiev, but took some files from the archives without permission. The pretext was to use those files for a documentary about UFOs. One of the files was used in a short video that was later part of the documentary. The case of Fyodor Ilivchenko, it was done to add solid case to a rather dubious production, according to the researchers. Ukrainian ufologists do not know if the documentary was actually ever aired, but apparently they consider it to be of low quality, of the so-called bread and spectacle variety. They might have known more than they talk about. According to them, the director of the TV channel refused to give back documents that he took from the archives, claiming that he already did return them. However, the researchers, they say that they verified and the documents had not been returned. They also say that the director refused to provide the coordinates for the eyewitness, and I assume they mean the pilot. But let me add something else, which is very interesting, and that's from my comprehensive research of unidentified submersible objects as reported by the Soviet and Russian and Ukrainian navies. In the 1970s, reports issued by Rear Admiral Viktor Domoslovsky, chief of the Soviet Pacific Fleet's intelligence department, described an unknown gigantic cylindrical object which was sighted by Soviet Navy in faraway regions of the Pacific Ocean. The object was 800 to 900 meters long. When it hovered over the ocean, smaller objects exited from one of its ends, like bees from beehive, and they descended into the waters and submerged. Sometime later, they re-entered the gigantic UFO mothership. After the smaller objects thus loaded inside, the UFO would fly away and disappear over the horizon. And I have another video about the same object that was sighted over Siberia in 1953 and caused destruction of some Soviet aircraft. So I'll put a link to it as well in my description. And as about the airplane that Ilivchenko was flying, well, the Tu-16 was first observed by Soviet public during the May Day military parade in 1954. About 2,000 of this versatile aircraft, they were built as strategic bombers, anti-shipping bombers, aerial refueling tankers, and reconnaissance aircraft. Production of this Tu-16 Badger ended in about 1960, but they were still flying, and the type was phased out of this Russian service by about 1993. So just wanted to let you know about one of the most interesting cases, and there are many, of the Soviet military interaction with UFOs. Stay tuned for more videos. Thank you. Please subscribe to my channel. Tell others about it. I really want to let as many people know about the Soviet, Russian, and Eurasian UFO and USO research, and let the world understand that UFOs have been observed for thousands of years over Asia and other parts of the world. Thank you.